All right, welcome to History of Money. Let's look at currency and finance in the American Civil War, Lecture 25. All right, in 1856, the Whig Party disintegrated, disappeared. One of the reasons why the Whig Party disappeared was they were unable to speak to the question of slavery. Slavery, by the mid-1850s, emerged as one of the hot-button issues. Not the only hot-button issue. Immigration was another one. But slavery was a really, really big one, and the Whigs just couldn't speak to it. The Republican Party emerged in its place, and for our purposes, it's just important to note that the Republican Party are the heirs of the Henry Clay, Alexander Hamilton economic program. Republicans support a protective tariff. Republicans support federal tax dollars for infrastructure projects like railroads. And Republicans support a national banking system, if not a Bank of the United States. So the Republicans, now headed by Abraham Lincoln, have that outlook. The Democrats are the same Democratic Party as before, Jacksonian, Jeffersonian, but this time even more rabidly pro-slavery and much more open to and eventually fully embracive of secession in order to protect the institution of slavery. And so in 1861, the Civil War breaks out. You know all about that war. I talk a lot about it in my U.S. survey class. For this class, we will strictly look at the finances because it was a very, very costly war. Immediately, within a few months, banks in the North and in the South suspend specie redemption. No surprise there. You have a big crisis going on, tumult. The banks are no longer going to redeem their banknotes for specie. Most gold and silver coin within a few months of the breakout of the war disappeared from circulation. And so the Civil War is going to be a lot of paper money, banknotes, but as we'll see, also greenbacks. Get to that in a moment. But banks in the North and South both. Now, the North has an advantage here because there are more banks in the North than there are in the South. The South has its share of banks, don't get me wrong, but the North has the most banks and more capital, and that's going to benefit the North during the Civil War because in times of war, especially modern times, finance is everything, money is everything, and the North has a fiscal advantage during this war. And it is an expensive war. Look at the finances for the Union, for the North. In 1861, federal expenditures were only $66 million. Imagine that, $66 million budget. By 1865, expenses were up to $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion. That is a huge jump. One of the consequences of the Civil War, the federal government will greatly enlarge the scope, the power, the expenses of the federal government will enlarge to an unprecedented degree, and it never quite goes back to its antebellum size. The federal government is expanded and remains expanded after the Civil War is done, but this is a huge jump in federal expenses. Taxes alone aren't going to finance this. Okay, you can raise taxes, but you can't raise taxes this much. Taxes ended up doubling, so taxes went up a lot, but that's not doubling taxes isn't going to cut it. And so the Union had to finance two other ways, and the Confederacy will do this too, less effectively: bond drives and greenbacks. Bond drives and greenbacks. Let's look at the first. Bond drives. Get your bonds here. 5 to 20. Fundable in 520 bonds in 3 years for sale here. All these big bond campaigns all throughout the North and in the South. And if you're a patriot, you contributed to the war effort by buying bonds, financing the war. That was one of the most patriotic things you could do during the Civil War, was lending the government your money. Well, there was a man who emerged as the main bond salesman during this period, and his name was J. Cooke. J. Cooke. Now, J. Cooke was born in Ohio, And when he was 18 years old, he joined a Philadelphia investment banking firm and worked as a clerk. Worked there for a few years. Then at age 36, he returned to Ohio and began his own investment banking firm, investing in canal and railroad projects. During his time as an investment banker in Ohio in the 1850s, he became friends with the Ohio governor, Salmon Chase. And Salmon P. Chase was governor of Ohio, and then when Lincoln became president, Lincoln appointed Salmon Chase to become Treasury Secretary. Jay Cooke is friends with Chase. Jay Cooke is an investment banker. Jay Cooke convinces Salmon Chase to give the Cooke House, the Cooke Investment House, a monopoly on underwriting the public debt, on underwriting the sale of Union bonds. Now, you remember in our discussion on the Rothschilds, we talked about investment banking and what it meant to be an underwriter. And an underwriting is to sign and to accept liability or guaranteeing payment for some sort of security. In this case, bonds. And so the underwriter assumes the risk of selling these securities. And if the underwriter is unable to sell those securities, they hold on to those securities themselves. The profit comes in that they sell the bonds, the securities, at a higher price than what they paid the issuer. And so that's called the underwriting spread. And so you can do quite well. And in this case, Cooke was massively successful. He received the monopoly in the fall of 1862. Bond sales reached $1 to $2 million per day. $1 to $2 million per day. Cooke became a millionaire. There weren't many millionaires in the United States in that period. $1 million went a lot longer than it does today, although I wouldn't mind having $1 million today either. But he ended up, over the course of the war, the bond sale was $2 billion. $2 billion worth of bonds. Cooke hired an army, basically, of 2,500 sub-agents. And these agents who worked for the Cooke firm went around the country, around the North, knocking on doors, making a plea to the man inside to buy some bonds, right? Buy some bonds. Support you support the war effort, right? Okay. Well, if you do, then buy some bonds. And so you would buy bonds, and maybe, sometimes there could be a little pressure in the community. Neighbors would start talking, "Oh, did you buy your bonds?" And if a neighbor didn't buy bonds, it might be a little suspect. Is he a Democrat? Is he not all Democrats were against the war effort, but there were a few who were against the war effort. And so buying bonds, participating in this, was a show of patriotism. Cooke became fabulously rich through these bond sales. But bond sales alone did not finance the war effort. Greenbacks also. Greenbacks. Beginning in February of 1862, the U.S. Congress authorized the printing of $150 million. That was the first issue. And the Congress said, this will be the first and last issue. We're not going to issue any more than this. And of course they did. They did issue more. But this was a fiat currency. Okay? It's not backed by anything except the good faith and credit of the United States. Nor is this currency emitted by a central bank. All right? This isn't a Federal Reserve note. This was issued by the U.S. government, by the U.S. Treasury. It was made legal tender in public and private payments. Congress authorized the issue. The U.S. Treasury printed it and then used the notes to buy supplies, to buy uniforms, to pay wages, to salaries, all of it, everything that goes into war. And so here it is. And there you see Lincoln on the face of that $10 note. And here's some more greenbacks. See why they're called greenbacks. This note is a legal tender for all debts, public and private. United States, $50. There's Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton. It's interesting that the different figures they put on the greenbacks. Lincoln, Hamilton. There's another $5 note. $10 note. Daniel Webster, big wig. Daniel Webster. The Congress also authorized the printing of small change of a subsidiary currency, postage stamps. And these postage stamps were a fiat currency of sorts. And our postage stamps today, we don't really circulate as currency. But in this day, you did. And this was 3 cents and this was 10 cents. And at any time, you could redeem it by using it for postage. But in the meantime, you could circulate it as small change. And I have down here $28 million. $28 million of these little tickets, these small postage stamps were printed, created during the Civil War. There are the numbers. So mission of 150 million, that was supposed to be the last one, but it is 6 months later, 5 months later, another mission of 150 million, and then in February, another emission of 150 million. Now, these notes did not hyperinflate. They inflated, they depreciated in value, but they did not hyperinflate. By the end of the war, a note, a greenback traded for 40 cents, a 40-cent gold dollar. Okay, so it's about 60% depreciation, which isn't terrible. All right, all things considered, it's not like you saw during the Revolutionary War, where it just hyperinflated. It's not like the assignat during the French Revolution. This is a significant depreciation, but one that was fairly under control. Nevertheless, prices across the Union went up. I mean, it went up a lot. Prices between 1860 and 1865 in the North increased by 138%. That's a lot of inflation. Okay, it's a lot of inflation between all the different suspension of specie payments, these paper notes, and greenbacks. What about the Confederacy? Well, the Confederacy also floats a bond sale, but that one doesn't work as well. There's not as much specie, there's not much coin in the South as in the North. The North is richer. The North has more money. The North have more banks. The South has some, but not enough to sustain a war effort. And so the Confederacy has to rely even more on paper currency than the North, and they print graybacks. Here's a $50 grayback, a $20 in Roman numerals on the back. A $10 note, and you see slaves in a cotton field printed on the front of that note. $10 note. The bond market's exhausted. They attempt to float some bond issues and are able to sell some bonds, but they don't have the success that J. Cooke has in the North. Specie payments, like I noted, were suspended immediately upon the war's beginning. Lots and lots of graybacks, fiat paper currency printed. And the Confederacy was unable to secure British aid during the war. The Confederacy makes these big appeals to the British for financial help. And foreign powers, the British, the French, stay on the sidelines. They don't get involved. There's a $100 note. You see John C. Calhoun pictured there, the Democrat from South Carolina. Some slaves in the field. Some more notes. Another. By the way, you can go to, especially if you're on the East Coast, you can go to a coin shop, and it's not uncommon to find Confederate paper money for sale. It's worth a lot now. It wasn't worth much then. In fact, it hyperinflated. But now it has numismatic value, of course. Some more. Calhoun and Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, by the way, was a strong Unionist, and so it is unlikely he would have appreciated being on the Confederate currency. But nonetheless, he was a Democrat. By that point, he passed away 15 years earlier. And so he is featured on this note. Here's some more Confederate notes. Like I said, unable to secure British aid or just aid from foreign investors. This was a cartoon at the time. The Confederacy appealing to the French. There's Napoleon III, who was Emperor of France at the time. And to the British represented by John Bull. And neither committed. Unlike the Revolutionary War, where France sided with the United States. I noted in the Rothschild lecture way back that the Secretary of the Treasury for the Confederacy, or excuse me, a Secretary of State for Confederacy, Judah Benjamin, was a Jewish man, and he made appeals to the Rothschild family, asking for help. The Rothschilds withheld. They did not invest in the Confederacy, believed them to be too great of a credit risk. Here's Lionel de Rothschild. But there were suspicions. The head of the Rothschild branch at Paris, Salomon James de Rothschild, was an open supporter and empathizer of the Confederacy, openly sympathized with the Confederacy. And the main Rothschild agent in New York, August Belmont. August Belmont was a Democrat, a vocal critic of Abraham Lincoln, a supporter of Stephen Douglas. And so there were some suspicions here. Are the Rothschilds going to get involved? Are the British and the French going to ally with the Confederacy? Didn't end up happening. And so the Confederacy just is unable to finance the war effort. By the end of it, the Confederate dollar depreciated 4,000%. 4,000%. And so here we have hyperinflation. This is a beautiful note here. You see the train. This is trying to signify, hey, the Confederacy, we've got industry. We're moving forward. But the truth was that the Confederacy was unable financially to back the war effort. By the end of the war, a bar of soap in the South was $50, and a suit of clothes was $3,000. That would be expensive in our day with how cheap the dollar has become over the last 100 years. A $50 bar of soap, what? Imagine back in those days when you were used to soap being 5 cents, $50 bar of soap. On top of that, the Confederacy's problems were complicated by the fact that states could issue their own paper money. Because the Confederacy, a lot more decentralized. It was kind of like the Articles of Confederation in some ways. Not completely, but had some similarities. And each state issued their own paper money. So you had Virginia issued paper money. There's a state of Louisiana, it was right there on the back of the bill, issuing paper money, which further sowed confusion into Confederate finances and in the monetary system down there. So anyway, that covers it. Hope that was an interesting lecture, and I will see you next time. Lecture 26, we will look at the post-Civil War era, because during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln will not create a central bank. He won't create a third bank in the United States. He won't create the Federal Reserve. But under Abraham Lincoln, the National Banking Acts, and so a new system from 1860s all the way up to 1913 called the National Banking System is established, and we'll look at that next time for lecture 26. See you there.